for bringing us up to date with some of the latest news there out of the ICJ. It is now my great honor of welcoming a continuous and consistent voice on climate and environment, the Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Mr. President, President of the Dominican Republic, my dear brother Luis, my longtime political mentor, the Honorable Ralph. I should call him the Great Ralph since he insists on calling everyone else the Great. Ralph the Great. And and how old I am. I have had, only this morning we reflected that I had the honor of giving the inaugural address at the Unity Labour Party in St. Vincent when it was formed. So 1994, so that tells you how long, 31 years ago. But Mr. President, I want to thank you and the people of Guyana for the boldness that you have exhibited here today. Nothing happens by accident. And if you are a person of faith, you will also believe even more that we are exactly where we are intended to be today at this point in time. That the International Court of Justice could just have delivered this morning, only weeks after the groundbreaking opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as well on climate, tells us that we are in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And I say so conscious that much of what we have been fighting for through advocacy has now received through these two opinions the legitimacy of the law. And while, as Ralph correctly pointed out, not every state in the world subscribes to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, beyond its legal obligations that it establishes through this advisory opinion, it sends the signal of what is morally right for the world to do in terms of the settlement of policy. And I start here because for us, this has never been an issue. This is our lived reality. And for anyone who wants to know what it is like to have post-traumatic stress disorder, try living in the Caribbean or the Pacific, where for 6 months of the year, you literally go to sleep every night wondering whether a freak storm will happen, as happened to Barbados in 2021, or whether, and it led to the loss of just over 1,000 houses being damaged or lost, or whether you will face a rapidly developing hurricane, as happened 1 year ago in Hurricane Beryl, and where the people of the Grenadines, literally on the front line, bore the risk of life being threatened, and of course we know property being decimated. But in my own country, I describe it as the body blows, because while we did not have the loss of life, we had an attack on our coastal environment that decimated our fishing industry and that literally negatively impacted on most of our coastal infrastructure, public and privately owned, and by extension, our tourism sector, which is the leading earner for our economy. I start here because while that is not specifically on the issue of biodiversity, it's handmaiden. You cannot address the issues of saving the planet without addressing the issues of both climate and biodiversity and pollution all at the same time. And to that extent, those of us, therefore, who live this reality in the region have come to understand that while we will argue strongly internationally, we must act even stronger locally. Today is an example of such local action. As we speak, my Minister of the Environment is in fact at a conference on wetlands as we speak today. Because in our own country, we just, with the help of the Barbados Wetlands Trust, resuscitated and reopened the Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary, which has been closed for almost 20 years, and which, with the assistance of funding from the government of Barbados, has now been reopened to the benefit not just of the people of Barbados and those who visit, but of course for the birds and all other forms of life that occupy those wetlands. And my friends, we have done this. I did it rather, because we're now out of it, but we did this while being in an IMF program. And I say this because choices matter, and choices are reflective of who we are, and what we stand for as a people. In addition to the work of the Barbados Wetlands Trust at Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary, we are also seeking to bring back in the remaining wetlands, many of which have been destroyed, but the remaining wetlands for preservation as we go forward. We are also in the process of creating two other entities that are intended to be able to preserve our biodiversity ultimately. The Barbados Oceans and Coastal Authority will be established by an act of Parliament within the next few months, the draft bill having been completed and now being presented to Cabinet. And this will allow us to elevate the work that we must do to preserve our coastal areas, one, from the erosion of sargassum, which is deadly on our eastern coast, but two, also from the natural erosion that is taking place as a result of agricultural runoff and other factors, and which, quite frankly, threaten what is our greatest concern, the stability of our water supply. Because if our aquifers are in fact polluted by salt water, then we will no longer be able to use those aquifers for the provision of drinking water for our people. So that coastal erosion has multiple negative consequences if we do not get on top of it. And therefore, we have determined that in the same way we have an institutional entity, and Ralph is big on the absolute necessity for institutions as a student of governance. If we have an institution that day in and day out is now responsible beyond the departmental work that has been excellent for the last 40 years set up by Tom Adams with the Coastal Zone Management Unit, we are now broadening it because we recognize that in the same way we have an institution to fix our roads and to build bridges and to deal with drainage on a daily basis, there must be a similar institution to be able to protect our coastal areas and our oceans, and by extension, therefore, the significant amount of marine life that is there. Like the Dominican Republic and others in the region, we made a determination when we issued our blue bonds 3 years ago, where we did the Debt for Nature swap with the benefit of the Inter-American Development Bank and Nature Conservancy, that we would buy back a portion of our debt, and by reissuing the debt with the guarantees from those two entities, we have been able to save the equivalent of about what will be over 15 years, somewhere between 50 to 60 million US, depending on the movement of the yield of the bonds, and that money is immediately capitalizing the Barbados Marine Sustainability Trust, which will seek to ensure that 30% of our marine area becomes a marine protected area. That is roughly about 55,000 square kilometers. I say so because Barbados' land area is about 430 square kilometers. So that you begin to understand scale when we are protecting just 30%, and that 30% is the equivalent of 55,000 square kilometers. I I'm not the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but I believe my brother Ralph will allow me to say that his country too will benefit similarly, because while they too have limited land area, they are a massive ocean state just as we are. So these conversations, Mr. President, are not academic. They are real, and they will determine what kind of livelihoods our people will have. They will determine what percentage of our national budget must go to recovering from climate crises or biodiversity loss. They will determine what kind of national economic stability and social stability our countries can maintain. This decision this morning from the ICJ is utterly and absolutely critical for us, because by preserving that a state, in spite of losing some of its land territory to sea rise, can maintain its maritime boundaries is so important as it relates to the ability of that state to be able to continue to manage its affairs, particularly given that the ocean is the next frontier that we must face and manage as we go forward in managing the climate crisis of the world. The reality is that there is much down there, and we have to be careful with how we treat to it. There may be opportunities that can supplement how humans can live on this earth by exploration and exploitation. But the exploration and exploitation of our marine resources should not come at the expense of our marine life, and it should not be done recklessly without a clear and complete understanding of the consequences of our action, because we are just stewards of this planet for the time that the Lord has allowed us to be living on this earth. I hope that this effort will also cause other countries in the region to recognize that even as we go for innovative financial instruments like the debt for nature swap, that we have an obligation to be able first to help ourselves. In our case, and I know Ralph has a similar mechanism as well, we have just established and changed our catastrophe fund to a resilience and regeneration fund, in which every single employee and self-employed person in Barbados is now required to contribute 0.25% of their gross earnings with no cap. And every employer is required to match the amount of his employee by contribution to that resilience and regeneration fund. In addition, the government has committed to place in that fund 0.35% of GDP each and every year. I give you this information because when you hear me and others speak about the Bridgetown Initiative and the need for a fairer, more transparent financial system to allow us to meet the needs of people and planet, in other words, the broader SDGs and climate action, loss of biodiversity, it is not against the backdrop of us asking people to do something with a begging bowl that we are not prepared to do for ourselves. We are doing it for ourselves. But the scale of what we face is so great that it cannot be done in isolation. And to that extent, therefore, what we are trying to do is to preserve that which none of us can recreate again. We look at the majesty of that bird in that poster behind those sitting on that wall. We look at the beauty of the Kaiter Falls. We look at the fact that none of us in here have the capacity to give life to any of these animals that become extinct. But we have arrogance that would cause us to believe that it will not happen, when the evidence of history is that both civilizations fail and species become extinct. The only thing that is required for this process to continue unabated is for countries and citizens, and note I said citizens, to do nothing. It is the collective action of citizens and the action of countries that can stem this regrettable slide into a situation where we are putting at risk those living organisms and animals that literally are required to keep balance in the earth. I hope that we can find, in addition to the actions which we are doing to boost public education and sensitization of persons, the strength also to continue the battle to create the opportunities for financing and fiscal space. Because, in a very real sense, in some instances, it is traditional practices that, even though they may not have carried us to the tipping point, the continued practices of many countries and groupings across the world can have the negative consequence of bringing species to the point of extinction. And it is that effort of education and engagement that cannot be ignored, while at the same time we must find the financial means to ensure that we are not asking them to sacrifice their living and to sacrifice their habitat for the benefit of an international public good. If we are to agree that there are global public goods, then there must be a dedicated financing mechanism for the maintenance of those global public goods. If not, we will ensure that a few carry a disproportionate burden that others are not prepared to carry. So, Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity to engage with the people of Guyana, but by extension, the people of the world who see that there is merit in joining this global biodiversity alliance. Our own country, we have settled our National Strategic and Biodiversity Action Plan 2020 to 2025, and we'll be renewing it as we go forward to 2030. In our country, we have also settled a few missions, 6 missions, between now and 2030. And it is of note that the first one is maintaining on our land and in our marine environment a clean, beautiful, and healthy environment, without which the possibility of life, the quiet enjoyment of our environment, and indeed the prosperity of our people will be impossible. So let us bond together and ensure that our collective voices can also allow us to go where the courts, for the first time in history, have gone this morning and this month through the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the International Court of Justice. This is the reason we are here at this time doing this business. It is not by accident. Thank you.
Thank you.